The last 3 addresses on my route have never received a piece of mail that came back. Not once. Not in 4 years. Every other house on the mountain, you get your share of returns. Deceased addressee, insufficient postage, refused, moved, left no forwarding. The usual little failures that prove the system is honest. But 19 Grainer Road, 22 Grainer Road, and 27 Grainer Road have a perfect record. Every letter arrives. Every letter stays. And the 3 people who live there have been dead for 11 years. I should tell you how this works. My name is Darcy Hollis. I'm 31. I carry mail for the Arnett branch of the United States Postal Service in Braxton County, West Virginia. My route is Rural Route 7, which covers 38 miles of paved and unpaved road running along the eastern face of Cutter Mountain. From the Elk River Bridge at the bottom up, to the old fire tower access at the summit, then looping back down through Grainer Hollow. 46 active delivery points. Roughly 90 boxes, individual and cluster, plus a handful of general delivery customers who still pick up at the office. It's a driving route, mostly. I work out of a right-hand drive LLV for the lower sections, and switch to my personal vehicle, a 2019 Subaru Outback fitted with a magnetic USPS placard for the upper stretches where the road narrows, and the LLV's clearance becomes a liability. The transfer happens at milepost 14, at a wide gravel pull-off the carriers before me wore into existence over decades. I share the route with Glenn Cosby. Not the way city carriers share, we don't split it down the middle. Glenn takes it 3 days a week, I take it 3 days, and we alternate Saturdays. We case the mail together every morning at 6:15, regardless of whose driving day it is, because the DPS volume and the parcel count both require 2 sets of hands to sort efficiently. Then whoever's off either goes home or picks up overflow from Route 4, which covers the flats south of the river. Glenn is 57. He's been carrying on this mountain for 22 years. He taught me the route when I started, walked me through every deviation, every dog, every customer's preference for where you wedge the packages when the box is full. He's quiet in the way that mountain people are quiet, not shy, not cold, just finished talking before most people have started. Glenn is the one who told me about the 3 addresses on Grainer Road. Not right away. He didn't tell me for almost a year. Grainer Hollow is at the far end of the loop. You come down the mountain's north face through a series of switchbacks that cut into rhododendron so dense the light drops by half, and then the road levels out along a creek bed and the hollow opens up. It's beautiful, in the way that places nobody goes are beautiful. The creek is clear. The hillsides are a mix of hemlock and poplar. There are maybe 12 houses scattered along a 2-mile stretch, most of them visible from the road, a few tucked back on private drives that haven't been graded since the last century. Grainer Road itself is a spur off the main hollow road. It runs about 3/4 of a mile to a dead end. There are 5 mailboxes on it, clustered in 2 groups, 2 at the base where Grainer Road begins, and 3 more about halfway up, spaced 40 or 50 feet apart on the left side. The 2 at the base belong to living customers. The 3 in the middle belong to the dead ones. I know this sounds like I'm being dramatic. I'm not. This is the operational reality. The names on the boxes are Pauline Hott, Box 19, Virgil Hott, Box 22, and Francis Hott, Box 27. They were siblings. Pauline and Francis were twins, born in 1941. Virgil was 5 years younger. They lived in 3 separate houses on adjacent parcels their father had subdivided from the original family tract in the 1960s. They never married. None of them had children. They died within 6 weeks of each other in the winter of 2014 to 2015. Pauline first, then Francis, then Virgil. The causes were, respectively, pneumonia, heart failure, and what the county coroner listed as failure to thrive, which I'm told is a medical way of saying a person stopped wanting to be alive. Their houses still stand. I've seen them from the road. 3 small frame structures, white with green trim, each one set back about 200 feet from the mailboxes. They look maintained. Not renovated, maintained. The gutters are clear. The porches are swept. The grass around them is mowed in summer and the paths are shoveled in winter. There are curtains in the windows. From a distance, they look occupied. They are not occupied. No one lives in those houses. No one has lived in them since 2015. There are no heirs. The parcels sit in a kind of bureaucratic limbo. The county assessor's office lists them as estate property with no executor, which means they are legally frozen, belonging to no one, maintained by no visible hand. And every week, mail comes for Pauline, Virgil, and Francis Hott. Not junk mail. Not the advertising circulars and coupon books that keep arriving for years after someone dies because the marketing databases haven't caught up. I mean first-class mail. Personal correspondence. Handwritten envelopes, some of them. Typed business letters with no return address. Occasional small parcels wrapped in brown paper. The mail is properly addressed, properly stamped, and routed correctly through the USPS processing system. It arrives in my DPS trays sorted and sequenced just like every other piece of mail on my route. I deliver it. That's the rule. I don't mean a formal directive. Nobody handed me a laminated card or read me a regulation. I mean, Glenn told me, very simply, on the day he finally showed me the 3 boxes, that the mail for those addresses gets delivered the same as any other mail. You pull up, you put it in the box, you close the flag, you drive on, you don't hold it, you don't return it, you don't mark it for any kind of exception. You deliver it, and you don't think about it harder than that. When he told me this, I was standing in the case room at 6:30 inches the morning, holding 3 envelopes addressed to people I'd just been told were dead. I asked the obvious question. Glenn said, "I know." I asked who was sending the mail. He said, "I don't know." I asked if the postmaster knew. He said, "Helen knows everything I know." I asked what happened to the mail after I delivered it. Glenn looked at me for a while. Then he said, "It goes in the box. By the time you come back, the box is empty." The first few times I drove Grainer Road, I watched the boxes the way you watch something you're not sure is real. I'd slow down, pull alongside, open the box, and place the mail inside the way I'd been trained. Flag up if there was outgoing mail, which there never was. Then I'd pull away and check my mirror. The boxes sat there. Small rural-style tin boxes on wooden posts, painted dark green, same as every other box on the mountain. Nothing moved. Nothing looked wrong. The houses behind them sat quiet under the trees. But the next time I'd come through, whether it was 2 days or 3, the boxes would be empty. This is not, by itself, impossible. Someone could be collecting the mail. A neighbor, a distant relative, a county official, someone with a reason and a key. But there are no neighbors close enough. The 2 houses at the base of Grainer Road are occupied by an elderly couple named Shope, who told me, unprompted, that they haven't walked past the first bend in Grainer Road in years. The houses beyond the hot parcels are abandoned and visibly deteriorating, and the road dead ends there is no through traffic. I asked Rhonda Shope once, as casually as I could, whether she ever saw anyone visiting the 3 houses. She said, "Honey, those houses take care of themselves." She said it like she was describing the weather. After 3 months on the route, I stopped asking questions. Not because I'd gotten answers, but because I realized the questions made people uncomfortable in a specific way. Not nervous, not defensive. More like I was asking them to explain something they'd already accepted the way you accept that the creek runs downhill. It simply was what it was. The Hotts were dead. The mail came. The mail went in the boxes emptied. Life continued. I will say this, there was nothing threatening about it. The hollow was quiet and green and still, and the 3 houses looked peaceful in a way that made me feel, if anything, a little sad. Like someone was waiting inside who would never come to the door. I developed a small ritual without thinking about it. When I placed mail in Pauline's box, I'd say "good morning" under my breath. When I reached Virgil's, I'd sometimes tap the top of the box twice with my knuckle, the way you'd knock on a friend's door. At Francis's, I'd just stand there for a second, because Francis's house had the best view of the creek, and the sound of the water was clear enough from the road that you could hear it over the engine. These were not sacred acts. They were the kind of small courtesies that develop when you visit the same places every day. The way you develop a relationship with a diner where you always sit in the same booth. I didn't think of them as anything more than habit. Then, in September of last year, something changed. It was a Wednesday, my day on the route. The weather had been warm for the season, a long Indian summer that kept the leaves green past their usual turning. I came down the switchbacks into Grainer Hollow around 1:45 inches the afternoon. The light was golden. The creek was low and slow. I had 3 pieces for the hot boxes, 1 for each. 2 of them were standard white envelopes, the kind you'd buy in a pack of 50 from a drugstore. The third, addressed to Virgil, was a small parcel, about the size of a paperback book, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Actual twine. I remember that because I hadn't seen twine on a package in years. I delivered Pauline's letter first. Box open, mail in, box closed. Normal. I pulled forward to Virgil's. Opened the box. There was already something inside. A single white envelope, unsealed, with my name on it. Not my route designation, not USPS carrier. My name, Darcy Hollis. Written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Cramped, shaky. The kind of handwriting that comes from hands that don't write often or that hurt when they do. I sat in the car for a while. The creek made its sound. A nuthatch called from somewhere in the hemlocks. The engine idled. I picked up the envelope and looked inside. There was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a legal pad. On it, in the same cramped handwriting, were 4 words. "Thank you for coming." I put Virgil's parcel in the box. I closed it. I drove to Frances's box and delivered her letter. Then I drove the rest of my route and went home and sat on my kitchen floor for 20 minutes because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I didn't tell Glenn. I don't know why. I think I was afraid that if I told him, he would have already known. And something about that possibility that this had happened before, that it was just another part of the pattern, that it fit neatly into the existing arrangement, was worse than the letter itself. A week passed. Then 2. No more letters appeared in the boxes. I delivered mail to the 3 addresses on schedule, maintained my small rituals, and began to convince myself that someone had played a prank. A neighbor, a hiker, someone who'd seen my name on the truck and thought it would be funny. But no one hikes Grainer Road, and the LLV doesn't have my name on it. In the first week of October, I found the second letter. Same box Virgil's, same envelope, same handwriting. This one said, "We don't get many visitors." I stared at it. The paper was damp. Not wet damp, the way paper gets when it's been in a humid room. The ink had not run. The handwriting was steadier than the first letter, as if the writer had warmed up or gotten stronger. I put the letter in my jacket pocket and finished the route. That evening, I drove back to Grainer Road in my own car, without the placard. I parked at the base and walked up to Virgil's box. I opened it. Empty. My delivery from that morning was gone. I kept walking, past the boxes, up the dirt track toward the 3 houses. The light was going. It was maybe 5:30, and the hollow was already in shadow. The air smelled like wet leaves and something else, something I couldn't name. Not unpleasant. Herbal, almost. Like dried flowers, but underneath them, something older. Like the smell of a house that has been closed up for a very long time, but not abandoned. I got within 50 feet of Pauline's house the first of the 3, and stopped. The porch light was on. It was a bare bulb in a simple fixture, the kind you'd find at any hardware store. It glowed a steady, warm yellow. Through the window behind it, I could see the edge of a curtain, a table lamp with a fringed shade, and the corner of a chair. The light was not on a timer. I know this because the house has no active electrical service. I checked later. Braxton County records confirmed the power was disconnected to all 3 hot parcels in March 2015, 3 months after Virgil's death. No reconnection has been filed. Appalachian Power has no active account at any of the 3 addresses. I looked at the next house, then the third. All 3 porch lights were on. The yellow glow from each one spilled down the steps and across the small patches of grass in front of the houses. The light was warm, inviting even. It looked like someone inside had turned on the lamp to welcome a guest. I stood there in the October dusk, and the creek made its sound behind me, and the mountains held the hollow like a cupped hand, and I felt something I have never felt before, and am not sure I can explain accurately. I was not afraid. That's the part I keep coming back to. The correct emotion, the rational emotion, would have been fear. 3 dead people's houses lit up like Christmas. An impossible letter with my name on it. And me, alone, in a hollow that gets dark an hour before the rest of the county. But what I felt was grief. Deep, total, abdominal grief. The kind that doubles you over. I stood on that dirt road and cried so hard I couldn't see. I don't know what I was crying for. Not the Hauts, I never knew them. Not myself. It felt more like I was feeling something that had been waiting there in the hollow to be felt. Like a frequency that had been playing for years and I'd finally tuned into it. I walked back to my car. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for a long time. The next morning, casing the mail, I told Glenn. He listened to everything. He didn't interrupt. When I got to the part about the porch lights, he set down the letter he was holding and looked at me with an expression I still can't fully decode. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't sympathy. It was something closer to recognition, like he was watching someone arrive at a place he'd been standing for a long time. He said, "Yeah." Then he said, "It took me about 8 months." 8 months for what? For them to write to me. He told me his story then, standing in the case room at 6:40 inches the morning while the mail sorted itself on the belt behind us. His was different from mine. His first letter had been in Francis's box, not Virgil's. It had said something different, he wouldn't tell me what. And it had been 16 years ago. "Did you write back?" I asked. He looked at me. "You can't write back to someone who doesn't have an address," he said. "They have 3 addresses. Those aren't addresses, Darcy. Those are just where the mail goes." I didn't know what he meant. I think I do now. I asked him what he did, what he changed, after the letters started. "Nothing," he said. "I deliver the mail." He went back to casing. I went back to casing. The morning proceeded. But I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. Glenn was casing the hot mail with a particular care. Not rushed, not reverential. Careful. The way you handle a letter to someone who matters. He squared the edges. He made sure each piece faced the same direction. He placed them in the tray in delivery order with a precision that exceeded what the route required. He had been doing this every morning for 16 years, and I had never registered it as anything other than professionalism. The 3rd letter came on a Saturday, my Saturday, late October. The leaves were turning now, and Grainer Hollow was the most beautiful place in the county. The kind of beauty that makes you understand why people settled here in the first place. When settling meant a lifetime of labor and isolation, and probably dying in the same room where you were born. This time, the letter was in Francis's box. It said, "She keeps your picture by the door." That sentence has no referent. I don't know who she is. I don't know whose picture. I don't know which door. But when I read it, standing beside my car on a cold morning with fog in the hollow, I felt something lock into place in my chest, not understanding, but the shape of understanding, the outline of it. Like pressing your hand into wet clay and lifting it away. I looked at Francis's house. The porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. From the road, it looked like every other empty house in Appalachia. Closed, patient, done. But on the porch railing, there was a coffee cup. White ceramic, plain, steam rising from it. I watched the steam for a long time. It curled up in the cold air and disappeared. The cup sat there, undisturbed, as if someone had set it down just a moment ago and stepped inside to get something. I delivered the rest of the mail and drove away. That night, I called my mother. Not about the letters, I didn't mention any of that. I just called because I wanted to hear her voice. She lives in Parkersburg, 2 hours north, in the house where I grew up. We talked about nothing for 40 minutes. Before she hung up, she said, "You sound different." I said, "Different how?" She said, "Like you've been visiting someone." I don't know what she meant by that either. But it stayed with me. In November, the letters started coming more frequently. Not every delivery, but close. Sometimes one per week, sometimes two. They were never long a sentence, occasionally two. They were never frightening, they were never demanding. They read like fragments of a conversation that was already in progress, as if whoever was writing them had been talking to me for years, and the letters were simply the part that surfaced into writing. A few of them. The garden will need turning in spring. Virgil's box. Can you hear the water today? It's louder this week. Francis's box. She's been singing in the morning again. We can all hear it. Pauline's box. Your hands are cold. You should wear the lined gloves. Virgil's box. That last one arrived on a day when I had, in fact, forgotten my gloves and had been flexing my fingers over the steering wheel heater since milepost 6. I don't know what to do with that. The letters were always on the same lined paper, always in the same handwriting. I began to think of the handwriting as a single voice, though it came from 3 different boxes. Maybe all 3 of them wrote together. Maybe one of them wrote for the others. Maybe the distinction didn't matter. I kept every letter. I have them in a shoebox under my bed. I don't reread them. I don't need to. Each one is exact in my memory. The words, the quality of the paper, the dampness or dryness, the specific feeling in my body when I read it. They are the most personal correspondence I have ever received, and they are from people who never knew me and who have been dead for a decade. Glenn and I developed a new habit in the case room. We stopped talking about the hot mail, but we both handled it differently now. On my delivery days, Glenn would place the 3 pieces in a separate stack, squared and faced, and slide them to the edge of the case where I'd pick them up last. So they'd sit on top of the tray and be the first thing I reached for when I got to Grainer Road. On his days, I'd do the same for him. We never discussed this. It just happened. Helen Marsh, the postmaster, noticed. I know she noticed because one morning in December, she came into the case room while we were sorting and stood by the door and watched us for about 5 minutes without saying anything. Glenn and I were working in our usual rhythm. He at the upper case, me at the lower, the mail moving between us in the practice pattern of 2 people who have done this together hundreds of times. When we finished, Helen said, "How are the folks on Grainer?" Glenn said, "Fine." Helen nodded and left. Later that day, I looked up Helen's service record on the branch seniority list posted in the break room. She'd been postmaster at Arnett for 19 years. Before that, she'd carried Route 7 herself. She had carried the route before Glenn. I began to understand that this thing, whatever it was, had a lineage. Not an organization, not a conspiracy, not a policy, a lineage. A chain of people who carried mail up a mountain and placed it in boxes belonging to the dead and received small, quiet messages in return. And who passed the practice forward not through instruction, but through proximity and trust. There was no manual for this, no operations directive, no section in the M41, which is the handbook that governs city and rural carrier procedures, that addresses the continued delivery of first-class mail to deceased recipients whose service has never been officially terminated. Technically, the correct procedure when a customer dies is for the executor of the estate or a responsible party to notify the post office, at which point we file a change of address or a deceased notation, and the mail is returned to sender or held for disposition. None of this has ever been done for the Hots. No one has filed anything. The system simply continues to process the mail, and we continue to deliver it, and the boxes continue to empty, and the letters continue to come. I want to be clear about something. I am not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts the way people use that word. Floating shapes, rattling chains, cold spots in hallways. What I believe is that there are processes in the world that don't have names yet, and that the postal system, which is the oldest continuous infrastructure in this country, sometimes intersects with those processes in ways that the operations manual does not anticipate. The Hots are dead, I accept that. Their houses are empty, I accept that too. But something in Grainer Hollow receives mail, and something in Grainer Hollow writes back, and the nature of what that something is has become less important to me than the nature of what it says. Because here is what happened in January. January 14th, my delivery day. Heavy snow the night before, 8 inches on the mountain, Less in the hollow, but still enough that I had to chain up to make the upper switchbacks. The route took an extra 90 minutes. By the time I reached Grainer Road, it was nearly 4 o'clock and the light was failing. I had 5 pieces for the 3 boxes. 2 for Pauline, 2 for Virgil, 1 for Francis. More than usual. I pulled up to Pauline's box and opened it. Inside was an envelope. Not for me. Not my name. The name on the envelope was Margaret Cosby, Glenn's wife. Margaret had been sick. I knew this because Glenn had mentioned it in November briefly, the way he mentions anything, with the minimum number of words necessary to convey information. She had been having headaches. The doctor had ordered a scan. The scan had found something. Glenn didn't say what. He was out for a week, then came back, and didn't mention it again. The envelope was sealed. The handwriting was the same cramped, shaky hand that wrote my letters. There was no return address. The stamp was a standard forever stamp, properly canceled with the Arnett postmark. I held it for a long time. The wind blew snow off the hemlocks in thin white sheets. The creek was muted under ice. The hollow was so quiet I could hear my own pulse. I had 2 choices. I could open the envelope and read what was inside, which would be a federal offense and a betrayal of everything the Postal Service exists to protect. Or I could deliver it to Margaret Cosby, whose address I knew, whose mailbox I passed every day on the lower section of Route 7. I couldn't do nothing. The letter existed. It was addressed. It wanted to go somewhere. I put it in my jacket. That evening, after I'd finished the route and returned the LLV and driven home, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the envelope. Margaret Cosby. The handwriting was precise despite its shakiness. Every letter formed with deliberate pressure, as if the writer knew this one mattered. I drove to Glenn's house at 7 o'clock. They live in a small ranch-style home on the River Road, about 4 miles from the post office. There was a light on in the kitchen. Glenn's truck was in the driveway. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, then walked to the door and knocked. Glenn answered. He looked at me, then at the envelope in my hand, then back at me. He said, "Where?" "Pauline's box." He took the envelope gently. He looked at the handwriting. His face did something I had never seen it do. It opened, like a window being raised, and behind it was everything he had carried for 22 years on that mountain. The quiet, the diligence, the squared edges and careful placement, the absolute refusal to talk about any of it. He said, "Come inside." Margaret was in the living room, in a recliner, with a blanket over her legs. She was thinner than the last time I'd seen her. Her eyes were clear, but they had the inward focus of someone managing pain. Glenn handed her the envelope. She looked at it. She looked at him. She looked at me. "From the hollow?" she said. Glenn nodded. Margaret opened the envelope with a slow, careful motion, sliding her finger under the flap. She pulled out a single sheet of lined paper. She read it. Her hand began to tremble, and then she pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes and breathed in a way that sounded like the first real breath she'd taken in weeks. Glenn sat on the arm of the chair and put his hand on her shoulder. I stood in the doorway of their living room, and I felt it again, the grief from the hollow. Not mine, not theirs. Something that belonged to the place, or to the relationship between the place and the people it wrote to, or to whatever process was happening in those 3 houses that I would never be able to name. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at me. "Sit down, Darcy," she said. I sat. She showed me the letter. It said, "The headaches will stop in March. The other thing needs more time. Don't stop the treatment. You are seen." I read it 3 times. I looked at Glenn. He was staring at the floor. "Has this happened before?" I asked. "A letter for someone who isn't on the route?" "No," Glenn said. We sat in silence for a while. The house made its settling sounds. The river was audible through the walls. Margaret said, "Thank you for bringing it." I said, "I didn't know what else to do." She said, "That's always been enough." I left. I drove home. I didn't sleep. In February, the letters in my boxes resumed their normal rhythm. Small observations, fragments of daily life that couldn't be daily life because no one was living it. The garden references increased. Someone mentioned birds, specific birds, a pileated woodpecker that had been visiting the dead oak behind Virgil's house. Someone noted that the creek was higher than usual for the season. The tone was not ghostly. It was domestic. It was the voice of people who were home and who noticed things and who wanted someone to know they'd noticed. In March, Margaret Cosby's headache stopped. Glenn told me this in the case room on a Thursday morning, with the same economy he applied to everything. "Margaret's better," he said. "Headaches are gone." He paused. "The other thing, they're watching it. Doctor says it's not growing." He went back to casing. I went back to casing. The morning proceeded, but I saw his hands. I saw the way he held the hot mail that morning. Not just careful, tender. The way you hold a letter from someone who saved you. I have to talk about what happened in April, because April is when I understood what I was actually part of, and understanding changed me in a way I'm still measuring. April 9th. My delivery day. Spring had arrived in the hollow, the creek was roaring with snowmelt, the rhododendrons were blooming, and the light came into Grainer Hollow like it was looking for something it had lost. I had the usual 3 pieces for the hot boxes, plus an unusually large parcel for Virgil. A flat, heavy package, about the size of a framed picture, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I delivered Pauline's mail. Normal. I pulled up to Virgil's box. There was a letter inside, addressed to me. It said, "Please bring the package to the porch." I sat in the car. In 4 years, the letters had never asked me to do anything. They observed, they commented, they offered, once, a piece of medical advice that turned out to be accurate, but they had never made a request. I looked at the package in my passenger seat. It was heavy, maybe 8 pounds. The brown paper was smooth, unwrinkled. The twine was knotted precisely. I looked at Virgil's house. 200 feet up, a dirt path, through a stand of young poplars, across a small footbridge, over a drainage ditch. The porch was visible from where I sat. The light was off. The door was closed. USPS regulations are clear. I am not authorized to leave the vehicle to deliver mail beyond the established delivery point in this case, the curbside mailbox, unless a specific accommodation has been filed for medical or mobility reasons. No such accommodation exists for Virgil Haught, because Virgil Haught died 10 years ago. I got out of the car. I took the package. I walked up the path. The poplars moved in the wind. The footbridge was solid under my feet. The wood gray but intact, the nails holding. The drainage ditch gurgled with spring runoff. I could smell the house before I reached it, that same herbal and old paper smell from my visit in October. Stronger now, richer, as if the house had been breathing all winter and was exhaling with the warmth. I stepped onto the porch. The boards were swept clean. A rocking chair sat to the left of the door. A folded blanket draped over its back. To the right, a small table held a glass jar of dried wildflowers yarrow, Queen Anne's lace, something purple I didn't recognize. The flowers were fresh. Not alive dried, but recently dried. They hadn't been sitting there for years. I placed the package against the door, leaning it at an angle so it wouldn't fall. As I straightened up, I looked through the window. The inside of Virgil's house was lit. Not by electric light, by daylight, ordinary daylight, coming through the windows on the far side. But the room I could see was furnished. A couch with a crocheted throw, a bookshelf filled with paperbacks, a wood stove with a kettle on it, a rag rug on the floor. On the wall, a framed photograph too far away to see clearly, but I could make out 3 figures standing in front of what might have been these very houses. The room was clean. The room was warm. I could feel the warmth through the glass, or I imagined I could, and by this point I was not confident in the distinction. I stepped back from the window. I walked down the path. I got in my car. I delivered Francis's mail. I drove home. That night, I took the shoebox of letters out from under my bed and spread them on the floor and read them all in order. 23 letters by that point. I read them as a single document, a single long conversation, and when I was done, I understood something I hadn't understood before. They weren't writing to me because I was special. They weren't writing to me because I had been chosen or initiated or because I had passed some test. They were writing to me because I came. That was all. I came up the road every few days, and I brought them their mail, and the mail was the thread that connected them to the world of the living, and my hands were the hands that carried that thread, and the letters were their way of holding the other end. The mail was not about what was in the envelopes. It never had been. The mail was about the act of delivery. Someone sending, someone carrying, someone receiving. The most basic human transaction. I am here, you are there. This object bridges the distance. The Hots had lived and died in that hollow, and whatever remained of them continued to participate in the one infrastructure that had connected them to anything beyond the mountain. They received mail because receiving mail meant being known. They wrote back because writing back meant being alive, in whatever way they were alive. And we, Glenn, and Helen before him, and whoever came before Helen, we carried the mail because carrying the mail was the only thing we could do for them, and it was enough. I cried again. This time, I knew what I was crying for. In May, I found the last letter. It was not in any of the 3 boxes. It was on the dashboard of my LLV when I arrived at the post office at 6:10 inches the morning. The LLV had been locked. The doors were secure. The windows were up. I had the only key. The envelope was on the dashboard, centered precisely between the steering wheel and the windshield, as if someone had placed it there with both hands. My name, same handwriting. I opened it standing in the parking lot, in the dark, with the mountains just beginning to show their outlines against a lightening sky. It said, "There is a woman on Elk Ridge Road whose husband died in December. She has not left the house. She does not eat enough. She thinks no one knows. Her mailbox is number 14. When you deliver there, stay for a moment. Not long. Just enough that she knows someone stopped." There was no signature. There was no closing. The letter ended, and the paper ended, and I stood there with it and understood that the Hots were not simply receiving the world through the mail. They were extending through it. They were using the one system they still had access, to the one system that still acknowledged them, that still carried their name and their address, that still sent a human being to their door, to reach past their own hollow and into the lives of people they had never met who needed what they had needed. Connection, witness, the knowledge that someone noticed. Elk Ridge Road is on the lower section of my route. Box 14 belongs to a woman named Carolyn Driscoll. I had been delivering to her for 3 years and had never exchanged more than a wave. She was a retired school teacher. Her husband Tom had died just after Christmas. I remembered the sympathy cards in the mail stream, the surge and then the taper, the way grief shows up in the postal system as a brief increase in first-class volume followed by nothing. The next time I delivered to box 14, I got out of the car. I walked to the box. I placed the mail inside. Then I stood there, by the road, for about 30 seconds. I didn't look at the house. I didn't wave. I just stood there and let whoever was watching from the window see that a person had come and stopped and been present. 3 days later, Carolyn Driscoll was standing by her mailbox when I pulled up. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just took her mail. Then she said, "You don't have to rush off." I said, "I know." We talked for 4 minutes. She told me about a cardinal that had been visiting her feeder every morning at 7. She said Tom used to fill the feeder and she'd let it go empty and then felt bad about it and filled it again, and the cardinal came back the next day as if it had been waiting. I said that sounded right. She said, "Thank you for stopping." I said, "Of course." When I got back in the car, I looked at the 3 hot letters in my tray, still waiting for delivery, still sorted and sequenced, still part of the ordinary flow of the United States mail. I drove up the mountain. I am writing this now, on a Sunday, in my kitchen. Tomorrow is Monday, Glenn's delivery day. He'll case the mail at 6:15. I'll help. We'll sort the hot pieces last, stack them clean, face them forward. He'll carry them up the mountain and through the switchbacks and into the hollow and place them in the boxes, and by Wednesday when I make the same drive, the boxes will be empty. And there may or may not be a letter waiting. I don't know who sends the mail. I've stopped looking. The tracking numbers, when I check them, and I check them less and less, originate from processing facilities that exist but that have no record of the specific pieces. The system treats them as real because they are real. They have stamps, they have addresses, they have the weight and texture of mail that matters. The USPS moves 45 million pieces a day, and 3 of them go to Grainer Hollow, and the system does not ask why, because the system was built to carry, not to question. I don't know what the HOTS are. I don't know if that word, the HOTS, even applies to what writes those letters and empties those boxes and keeps the porch lights on and sets out coffee cups and fills jars with dried wildflowers. I don't know if it's 3 people or 1 thing or a quality of the hollow itself or something the postal route created by running through the same landscape for 100 years, wearing a groove into the world that the dead could use to stay in touch. I know it isn't dangerous. I know it doesn't lie. I know the letter about Margaret's headaches was accurate. I know the letter about Carolyn Driscoll was accurate. I know that whatever writes from Grainer Hollow is paying attention to the living with a care that most of the living don't manage for each other. Helen Marsh retired last month. On her last day, she came into the case room and placed a single envelope on the counter. It was addressed to Pauline Hott, 19 Grainer Road. There was no return address. Helen had hand-canceled it with the Arnett postmark. "I've been meaning to send this," she said, "just never got around to it. Glenn put it in the tray. I delivered it on Thursday. By Saturday, the box was empty. I don't know what Helen wrote. I didn't ask. Whatever it was between her and the hollow, and the mail carried it the way the mail carries everything, without judgment, without understanding, without needing to know what's inside, to know that it matters. There's one more thing. Last week, casing the mail, I found a piece I'd never seen before. It was in the DPS tray, machine sorted, sequenced in delivery order between Box 26 and Box 28 on Grainer Road. A standard white envelope, properly stamped, properly addressed to me, at Box 27, Francis Hott's address. Not my home address, not the post office. Francis's mailbox, on Grainer Road, as if that were where I lived. Glenn saw me holding it. He didn't say anything, he just kept casing. I put it in the tray. I drove the route. When I reached Grainer Road, I delivered the other mail, first Pauline's, then Virgil's. Then I pulled up to Francis's box. I opened it to place the day's delivery inside, and I set my own letter on top. I closed the box. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, creek singing, the hollow holding its green cathedral silence around me. Then I opened the box again. The letter addressed to me was gone. The rest of the mail, Francis's mail, was still there. My letter had been taken, received, accepted. In the 5 seconds between closing the box and opening it again, something had collected the one piece addressed to Darcy Hollis at 27 Grainer Road and left everything else. I closed the box. I drove away. I don't know what this means. I don't know if I'm being given an address the way Helen was given a route and Glenn was given a silence to carry. I don't know if 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, a carrier I've never met will pull up to Box 27 and find a letter in cramped handwriting and feel grief that doesn't belong to them and begin to understand that the mail doesn't stop. I know I'll be back on the mountain tomorrow. I know the boxes will be empty. I know there may be a letter. I know I'll deliver what comes and carry what's given and stand at the boxes for a moment longer than the route requires, because the moment is the point. The mail doesn't stop. Not for weather, not for distance, not for death. That's not a slogan. That's just what I've seen.